I'm Emily and welcome to the Pepper Knits Knitting Podcast. I'm a knitter based in Perth in Western Australia, and thank you for joining me for episode 8. I have a few finished objects to share today and a couple of new works in progress that haven't been shown on the podcast. It's been a while since I last recorded, so I do have a little bit to share, and I also have an acquisition with a plan attached to it that I will share at the end. I'll quickly talk about what I'm wearing. This is my 9pm tank designed by Tiffknit. This was the first one that I made. If you watched my most recent episodes, I just finished my second version. I've knit them both in the same yarn, which is the Knitting for Olive Cotton Merino, and this is in the colour Mole, which is this beautiful warm brown colour. I've spoken about the pattern a few times. It's a great pattern, so if you are looking to start your summer knits, if you're living in the Northern Hemisphere, it's a pattern that I would highly recommend. So my first finished object for today's episode is my Tolsta tee fingering weight, which is a pattern by Rebecca, also known as the Creabea. This is the second Tolsta tee that I've made. The first time I've knit the fingering weight version, and I think I much prefer this one. I think this is a lot more functional for the climate that I live in. It's a much thinner fabric, obviously, than the DK weight version. I still wear my DK weight version a lot, but not so much during the middle of summer. This one is knit in the Knitting for Olive Pure Silk, so it's very light and airy and very good for hot weather. So I'm glad that I have a second version in my wardrobe. If you haven't heard of the Tolsta tee pattern, it is a very simple raglan construction for a t-shirt, and the knitter is given the encouragement to add their own modifications. So I'll talk through the modifications that I made for this version. I knit the body and everything pretty much to pattern. I think I used the recommended needle size. I used a 3.25 for the body, and given that it's a fingering weight yarn, it's made this really beautiful, very open and airy fabric. The meterage requirements for this t-shirt are quite low, so it was a good way for me to experiment with using the pure silk, as I hadn't used it before this project. I think I only needed 3 balls. I only just had to break into the 3rd ball to finish this top. In the last episode, I had finished the raglan and just split the sleeves, and I think I'd added the collar on as well. So you would have seen the finished look with the collar, but obviously I've since blocked it and worn it a little bit, so this is how it has turned out. For the collar, I did go down quite a few needle sizes. I went down to a 2.25mm needle, mainly because I really didn't want a very wide open neckline. The design of the Tolsta tee is intentionally done with quite a wide neckline, so it's definitely not sitting very high on my neck, but it is still quite wide. It's more of a boat neckline. So you can see that the fabric on the collar is quite a bit tighter of a gauge than on the body. I don't think it looks too weird. I think because it's on the neckline, it looks like it's supposed to be like that. I did just pick up stitches from the cast on edge, so that was another reason why I just wanted to make sure it wasn't going to be very wide, because I picked up every stitch that I had cast on. For the sleeves and for the body, I didn't go down any needle sizes. I just kept using the 3.25mm needle and then sewed the edge down when I was done. So it was very simple to do. It was a really easy technique, and I really like how it looks in the pure silk. I was a little bit worried about how ribbing would look in this yarn. I thought it potentially could look a little bit sloppy, and I wasn't sure I could rely on blocking to even out any wonky stitches. So overall, I do quite like this finished t-shirt. Raglans are not necessarily my favourite construction to knit or to wear, but yeah, the Tolsta tee is a fave. I know a lot of people have made multiple Tolsta tees, and it is a really good pattern. So if you're, again, looking for some summer inspiration, this is another pattern I would highly recommend. I think the combination of having it knit at a loose gauge has meant that the fabric is super drapey and flowy, which is great for a summer t-shirt like this. I really enjoyed using the yarn. I didn't find that it was hard wearing on my hands at all, but saying that there are very limited purl rows that you're doing in this, there are some short rows, so I did have to do a little bit of purling. And obviously I also eliminated the purling by not doing any ribbing. So I could see how if you're doing something like the Cumulus tee with a lot of back and forth knitting, potentially it could get a little bit hard on the hands. But for me and the way that I knit, I really enjoyed using it. The other thing with this yarn is that I had heard it grows quite a lot. In anticipation of that, I did knit much smaller size than I perhaps would have for a different yarn, and I'm pleased to report that it grew out to be quite a good width. I'll try it on actually so I can show off how it fits and the drape of the fabric as well. So here is the finished t-shirt on. I'm quite happy with the size of it. I knit the first size in the pattern versus the second size, which was recommended for my bust circumference, but I did end up with a very good amount of ease. There's not too much. I don't like my t-shirts to be really oversized, but yeah, quite happy with the fit of this one. It is quite cropped, however. I was expecting the length to grow a lot more than it did, so I do have to be careful if I'm wearing this to work that I'm wearing enough like high-waisted enough pants to not be wearing a crop top basically. I'll stand up and show off the length. As you can see with these shorts, it does cover the waistband, and I think it has grown out a little bit as I'm wearing it, so I didn't want to add more length until I'd had a bit of wear out of it, maybe washed it a couple more times just to anticipate that extra growth. My one comment for the pattern, which goes for both versions that I've made, is that I don't feel like there's enough short rows. I haven't heard anyone else make this comment, so it could just be the way that the t-shirt sit on me and maybe my row gauge, but there's not that many short rows in the pattern, and I do find that I'm eventually having to readjust and I feel like it's falling back on my neck. I'm not sure if you can see that how low the t-shirt goes at the back. I would prefer it to sit maybe more like this, a little bit higher, but it's just something that I will keep in mind if or when I make a third version. I should probably also check my row gauge to check that I'm not coming up short, and that's why. It might just be a combination of that and the way that the pattern is written, or I think it is intended to be quite a wide and open neckline anyway. If low back necks is something that bothers you and you do want to knit this, I would recommend double checking your row gauge and maybe adding in a couple more short rows just to be on the safe side. Yeah, like I said, I think for my next version, because I probably will make another one, I will chuck a few more in anyway, just to make sure that I'm happy with the finished fit. I also added in a really cute one-of-a-kind tag into the back. I bought this from Calico and Ivy, my local yarn store. I think they're Kylie and the Machine labels. I partly added in because it's very cute, but for functionality as well, because there's not many short rows. Sometimes when I'm just grabbing this and I'm not holding it up properly, I can put it on back to front and then wonder why it's so uncomfortable. So the tags are also very functional in that straight away I can see what is the back of the garment and what's the front. So that wraps up my first finished object. I have been getting quite a bit of wear out of it, mainly to work. I think because, yes, it is a t-shirt, but the folded edges and the silk just elevates it a little bit so I can get away with wearing it at work. So moving on to my next finished object, and this is something that has been on the needles for a little while, so I'm glad that I have them as a finished object. And these are my Somerset socks, which is a pattern by Marion and Knits, and it's in the first volume of the 52 weeks of socks. So I'll take one of them off the sock blocker. Here's the sock a little bit closer. You can see the beautiful motif that runs all the way down the front of the sock. I have spoken about these quite a bit already on the podcast, so I'll keep it brief here. But I had finished the first sock, I think, in the previous episode, and I cast on the second sock during knit night and managed to get most of the way through the foot. And then over the week, I've just slowly been chipping away at the heel, and then the leg and the cuff I just smashed out in one night. So it's nice that I have these socks finished and can wear them when the weather gets a little bit cooler. So I knit these socks in the Manos del Uruguay yarn called Feliz in this really nice grey tonal colour. You can definitely see the different shades of grey in the stockinette. Not so much in the motif, but I think it adds a little bit of depth and interest to the fabric as well. I was interested to see how this yarn would block out. It did feel a little bit squeaky as I was knitting it. It is a superwash yarn, I believe, so I was interested to see if that would change during blocking. It's definitely softened up quite a lot. It still has a little bit of squeakiness, but I think as I wash and wear them, they'll just soften up really nicely. It definitely has softened up a lot during the first block. The yarn did grow quite a bit with blocking though, which I wasn't expecting, even though it is a superwash yarn, so perhaps I should have. I knit the smaller size in the pattern, which is a 56 stitch sock on 2.25mm needles, which I find usually fits me pretty well. They are a little bit on the looser side though, which I am a little bit upset about because I know as I wear them they'll just loosen up even more. I also think this heel construction might have something to do with it. I believe this is a Flegel heel. These are knit toe up, so I think that is what the heel is called. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it is just a short row heel with obviously the gusset here, and then you do the short rows and the decreases to go back into the stitch count for the leg. I am a little bit nervous about the lack of slip stitches on the back and just having stockinette fabric here. I'm not sure if that will wear through very quickly. The yarn, it does not have any nylon in it. It is a superwash merino and modal blend, so it does have the strength from the modal, which is, I think it's more like a rayon fabric made from beech trees. But then again, I'm not someone who wears my socks in shoes or boots very often, so it might just be another pair that I wear at home. So here is a close-up of the sock. You're starting with the toe and then do the really nice braid just above the toe, and then you go straight into the motif, which is repeated all the way up the sock, and then you finish with another Estonian braid before doing the twisted rib. And then I did a half Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off for the cuff, which I find has given me just enough room. I say half Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off because I'll only do a yarn over every other stitch. I don't do a yarn over for every stitch I cast off, so I find that it doesn't flare out and it doesn't leave me with too much fabric and stays up on my leg nicely. I did also mention last episode that there is quite a bit of errata in the pattern, so it's something to be aware of if you want to make these socks yourself. I would maybe suggest being a little bit experienced with toe-up socks before jumping into this one. This was only the second or third toe-up socks that I have made, so it was a little bit confusing and yeah, a little bit annoying that you have to refer to a PDF of errata as well as the pattern. But yeah, it's just something to keep in mind. I know obviously no one publishes a pattern expecting there to be mistakes in it, so things do happen like that, but yeah, something to keep in mind if you're wanting to knit these socks for yourself. Of course, overall, I really like the finished design. I'm glad that I paired this with a nice neutral grey colour. I think it really shows off the motif very nicely. So that is finished object number 2, and moving on to my third one. I also spoke about this in my previous episode, and it is something that I have some mixed feelings about. I'll just do up the buttons so I can show it off properly. So this is my home cardigan, which is a pattern by Caidree, and I've knit this in the Heirloom Merino Magic 10-ply in the colour Magnolia. It's a yarn that I purchased quite a while ago, and I knit it into a sweater number 18. I ended up ripping the yarn out from that sweater because I didn't like the way it looked, the fit wasn't quite right, and it was also quite itchy for a superwash yarn. This is not the softest feeling or like smoothest yarn that's out there. I've definitely felt non-superwash yarns that are less irritating and itchy than this one, which is quite a shame, but it was very, very inexpensive, so it's something that I would definitely avoid purchasing again in the future. I wouldn't even use it for babies because I'm not super sensitive, and I do find it quite unwearable to wear against skin. So saying that, I ripped out the sweater number 18 and I had it sitting in stash for quite a while, and it was just bothering me that it was sitting there and not getting used. Of course, I could have destashed it or given it away or donated it, but I did want to give it a second chance and try and make it into something wearable. Because it is a 10-ply or kind of worsted Aran weight yarn, I was looking around for patterns, and specifically cardigans, as there's a bit of a gap in my wardrobe for cardigans. The home cardigan ticked a few boxes, mainly that I could meet gauge for the pattern, and it's the second Caidree pattern that I've made, and they're very easy to follow, very clear, and overall I really liked the simple silhouette of the dropped shoulder. So I managed to knit most of the body in pretty much one weekend. It flew off the needles. I was knitting on it quite a bit, but it's also knit at quite a loose gauge or quite a big gauge. I think it's knit on 6mm needles is what I managed to get gauge on. So compared to doing lots of summer knits, this did go by very quickly. I also felt like because of that, it wasn't a huge time investment in something that I was still unsure on whether I would like. So going through the details of the cardigan, I've knit the first size, and the one modification I made was to change the ribbing all into 2x2 rib for the bottom band, the body, and also for the cuffs on the sleeve. Apart from that, pretty much everything else stays the same. Because of the 2x2 ribbing on the bottom band, I did have to fudge where I put the buttonholes a little bit. I did add one more in, and then last episode I was thinking that I had to rip it back and redo it. I did just sew it up, and you can't really see, I don't think. When you're up super close, it's a little bit visible, but from afar, I don't think you can really tell that there was a hole there. I just sewed it up with some scrap yarn when I was weaving in my ends. So you'll remember from last episode that I was complaining about the colour of the yarn. I'm still not a huge fan of it. It definitely has a really strange yellowy green undertone. I'm not sure how well it's being picked up. I think it looks a bit more cream and neutral on camera, but trust me, in person, it's not the nicest or most flattering colour or something that I find fits into my wardrobe very easily. I also spoke about potentially over dyeing it, perhaps black, as I had an Ashford black wool dye. I spoke about that on my Instagram, and I had so many people messaging me being like, don't do that, that's probably a really bad idea. With the undertones of the yarn, dyeing it black will just make it look like a really weird green yellow colour. I had a feeling that it was probably a bad idea. I was about to do it, and I just think something in my rational brain was telling me, don't do this, this is such a bad idea. I did have a few people recommend doing a brown colour instead, which is much more sensible. So thank you to my lovely friend who's very kindly messaged and saying, maybe just hold off, maybe think about this a little bit more, and maybe brown is a better idea. So after I decided that dyeing it black was not going to happen, I did block it and sew on these really nice brown buttons. I do like the brown buttons on the cream. I think it really leans into the grandpa vibes. But again, it's not something that I'm finding works well in my wardrobe. I haven't worn this at all since I finished it. I put it in my wardrobe and have it there every day to choose from, but I just don't find I ever reach for it. I think I just have it in my mind that the colour doesn't fit into my wardrobe, and then I don't even try and style it. So I think that brown would fit in a lot better. Obviously, I clearly wear brown and I'm comfortable with wearing it. So once I gain the courage back up again, I think I will give it a go with dyeing it brown instead of black. I'll try it on and show off how the fit of the cardigan is, because I do really like the pattern and I do quite like the fit of it. I think it is just the colour that is preventing me from wearing it. I'm also glad that I just stuck with the 3 buttons. I think this 4th one being all the way up here would have just looked a bit weird. So I think the way the button band sits with just 3 buttons is perfect. And it's a perfect length as well. It's not too cropped, but it's not a super long cardigan. I think it does look quite nice buttoned up, and the sleeves are also blocked out to a perfect length now as well. I did think they might have been a little bit too long. As I'm wearing it now, I think they're spot on. I do find that the sleeve bubbles a little bit. I think the ribbing, I either need to go and re-block it to be straight. I did try and do that when I originally blocked it, but I think I just need to do that again properly. Perhaps I'd also gone down too much of a needle size. I did the recommended difference in needle sizes in the pattern, but maybe with the 2x2 rib that was not such a good idea. I also think I bound this one off much more tightly than this one, which is annoying me a little bit now, so I might need to go back and redo that as well. But apart from that, the fit of it is really nice. I do like a good drop shoulder. I think it's nice and casual. There's a good amount of positive ease in this that it does feel like the kind of thing you can just throw on. And again, leaning into the grandpa vibes with the cream color. So I'm counting this as a finished object for now. I am very happy with the fit and the overall construction was very enjoyable. It's just a shame that the yarn is letting it down. So that's a wrap on finished objects, and let's move on to my works in progress. So the first work in progress is something that I wasn't expecting to cast on at the end of last episode. I had the yarn as an acquisition and I wasn't sure about what I was going to use it for. But seeing as it's probably the last summer knit that I'll be doing before next summer, I just wanted to cast it on and get it going. So this was the yarn. It's this beautiful hot pink eucalyptus yarn. It is 165 meters per 100 grams, so it's a bit on the heavier DK weight, and that was giving me a little bit of confusion on what to make with it. If it was a fingering weight, I definitely would have gone and made a Tolsta tee or something like that with it. I probably could have squeezed a cropped Tolsta tee out of 2 skeins of this because that's all I had, but I thought I would try something a little bit different. So this is yarn that my parents purchased for me when they were in England, and I think there was only the 2 skeins available, and they very kindly bought both of them for me. The pink is a little bit outside my comfort zone, which made me a little bit hesitant to knit it into a top or a t-shirt. I thought about potentially making a drinks on the patio crop or a Vegas top, which is more like a vest and it doesn't have any sleeves, it's just like a sleeveless top, which are both lovely patterns, but they're not something that I think I would get a lot of wear out of. I have quite a few sleeveless tops that I've knit already in my wardrobe, and the only ones that get a lot of wear are my 9pm tanks and my mini mock neck tank. So I didn't want to knit more knowing that I already don't wear the ones I own a huge amount. So I decided to go with my other option instead, which is a pair of shorts. I know it's not to everyone's taste to have knitted shorts, and they're definitely not something that I'd wear out. I have a pair of knitted shorts already and they're the most comfortable loungewear. I just wear them as pajamas around the house. I knit the first pair in a fingering weight 100% viscose yarn, I think. So they're super soft, but they've stretched out a huge amount and they are looking a little bit worse for wear. So I am knitting these kind of to a pattern, kind of just winging it myself. I did purchase a pattern to make my first pair of shorts. I wouldn't recommend it. It has very limited sizing, which is a shame, and the instructions aren't very clear or very well thought out, so I won't link it or anything. But I will talk about how I've constructed these. I based it kind of on that pattern, but I've completely changed the gauge and a few other things as well. The construction is nothing that is completely out there, so I feel comfortable sharing it because it's a very simple construction that I'm sure most shorts patterns are constructed in a similar way. So I did a gauge swatch on 3.5mm needles, which has given me quite a dense fabric. It's definitely breathable and it's not too stiff, but it's also not super see-through, which is obviously something that I would have preferred for knitting a pair of shorts. I'm also playing a little bit of yarn chicken as well, so I think I'll just have to alter the pattern even further to maximize my yarn usage, but I'll briefly talk about how these are constructed. So I cast on the inside here, and then I knit the whole waistband and then joined it back to my cast on edge. I also added some yarn overs at the center front to thread through either an I-cord or elastic or ribbon or something at the end. I'm not sure if I'll have enough yarn to do a I-cord in the mashing yarn, so I could potentially use something else, or I think a ribbon would look quite cute as well and maybe be a little bit more functional. I have an I-cord on my first pair of shorts and it just stretches out a huge amount, and it's also quite thin, so I do find that it digs in and it's not the most comfortable. So after I had joined in the waistband, I went straight into the raglan shaping. It's very simple, it's just a 2-stitch raglan at the center front and the center back. I'm just going to keep knitting until these fit and then see how my yarn management is going. I'm not planning on making the legs super long, so I don't need a huge amount of yarn when I split off for the legs. And if I do have enough yarn, I would like to do a folded hem at the bottom. If I don't have enough, which I'm thinking I probably won't, I will just either do a simple garter finishing at the end or just leave them as some rolled hems at the bottom. So yeah, I'll just see how the yarn management goes. As you can see, they're not even on needles at the moment. I was working on them a little bit here and there, but my next work in progress has taken priority. So I'm not sure if I will get around to finishing these this summer, or I might save it as a bit of a head start on next summer's knitting projects. So moving on to my work in progress that has been getting the most amount of attention, and that is my Lanark sweater, which is a pattern also by Rebecca, and it's a pattern I've been wanting to knit since it was launched. So I'm really excited that I've finally gotten around to making one. This is a birthday present for my sister actually. She sent me a photo from Shein advertisement a while ago, I think it was almost a year ago, and she asked if I could make her a sweater. It was a quarter zip sweater in a rib texture that had been very popular in ready-to-wear fashion, and asked if I could make her one similar. So I said of course I would love to do that. So I'm making the size 2 with a couple of modifications, or one main modification. So I'm knitting the size 2 for her, which gives her the recommended amount of ease on the smaller size. She didn't want something to be too oversized, and she tried it on today and was really happy with how it was fitting so far. If you haven't seen the Lanark sweater pattern, it is one of those very trendy quarter zip sweaters with this beautiful collar, and it is a drop shoulder construction, and it's knit in all over half fisherman's rib. Look at that beautiful squishy texture. It's so much fun to knit, and I think it will be a really nice wearable piece for my sister. So in terms of the yarn, I wanted to knit this in a tweed yarn, and I did think about using the Rowan felted tweed. I really like the look and the feel of that yarn. It's something that I do still want to try, but for the price point, it would have made for quite a pricey sweater. This pattern does use quite a lot of yarn. I think it's a combination of the stitch pattern being half fisherman's rib, and also just the construction of it, because there is the double folded collar and there's quite a lot of fabric up here, and it is fairly long as well. It's definitely not a cropped sweater. So I decided to go for a bit of a more affordable option and use the Drops soft tweed yarn. I sent the link to my sister, and she picked out this beautiful grey colour, and it has some really nice light and dark flecks in there. It's not as tweedy as I thought it was going to be. I'm not sure if it's just the stitch pattern that loses some of that, but I think there's some really nice variation in the colour and a little bit of textural element in there as well. So in terms of the construction of this, I was a little bit worried about casting it on. I have heard some people say that it's quite complicated to wrap your head around, and especially in combination with the stitch pattern. So in terms of the construction of the sweater, the yoke was the most challenging part. Once I'd gotten past that, I did find the rest of the sweater quite easy to construct. Rebecca has since launching the pattern, relaunched it in a way in terms of reworking the wording in the pattern, and also adding in some videos to go along with the pattern for that extra support. I didn't find I needed the videos. I found that the written instructions were simple enough to follow. They weren't necessarily simple to execute, but I could understand what I was needing to do. You just have to be very careful in reading each step very carefully and copying that exactly. It's not the kind of construction I felt like I could just quickly skim through and know exactly what to do, like a raglan or a maybe more simple drop shoulder pattern. I did find that I had to keep the pattern close by at all times to make sure that I was following each step correctly. But saying that, I did manage to get through without having too many dramas. I don't think I had to frog back too much, which was really good in this stitch. I was a bit worried about tackling an all over half fisherman's rib sweater, to be honest. I'm not very confident with brioche or half fisherman's rib, so I did take the time in my swatch to practice tinking back and fixing mistakes and doing the decreases. So I'm glad I took the time to iron out all of the issues that I was having with that before I tackled this. So I was very confident that if I did make a mistake or drop a yarn over or something, I would be able to recognize that and fix it as well. There is one little mistake in the collar as well. I think I missed slipping one of the edge stitches, or something funky happened there, and I tried to fix it but couldn't work it out. I don't think that will be noticeable at all on the last one, especially when the zip's sewn in. I think I can just sew it in a way that no one will notice, and it's not meant to be perfect. It is a handmade sweater after all. I have made the zipper sweater man a couple of times as well, so I was confident in doing the Judy's Magic cast on for the collar and how all of that works, and doing the facing and the zip. I'm not too worried about that. But of course, because this is a drop shoulder instead of a raglan, the instructions were different in terms of how you finish the rest of the yoke. But I am pleased to report that there were not too many dramas, and very happy with how this is looking so far. I'm glad that I finally tackled this sweater, and it was nice and very humbling, to be honest, to be doing something a little bit outside of my comfort zone. But overall, I'm much more confident with doing half fisherman's rib now, almost to the point where I think I'm ready to potentially start thinking about doing the Agnete cardigan. That's something that I really want to make and have the finished object for, but I'm just working myself up to be able to do an all over brioche cardigan. So it's nice that this has given me a little bit of a confidence boost to eventually tackle that project as well. So as you can probably see, I did make one modification to the pattern, and that is that I knitted this completely flat instead of in the round, and I just plan on seaming it up at the end. So there are a few reasons why I decided to do this. The main reason is that when I was knitting half fisherman's rib in the round, it didn't look the same as when I was knitting it flat. The whole yoke is knit flat, and then you join each of the front and the back panels in the round to knit the body. I did start doing that, and I was very smart and put in a lifeline or a bit of scrap yarn before I did that. Rebecca does mention in the pattern that you might need to play around with how you work in the round versus flat. I think in her versions and her samples and the way she knits, she knit the half fisherman's rib inside out in the round, and that meant that she could have a nice even texture all over. Once I started knitting in the round, obviously I could see that my wrong side looked pretty similar to the wrong side of when I was knitting flat, but my right side just wasn't looking as nice and crisp in the V columns as when I was knitting flat. So if you can see in the texture, the V columns stick out really nicely, and they're very prominent. I found when I was knitting flat, it was going very flat against the purl stitches as well. So I just decided that I was going to knit everything flat. I also wasn't enjoying the process of knitting half fisherman's rib in the round. I found I couldn't get into the same rhythm as when I was knitting flat, so I just thought, I'm not enjoying it and it doesn't look good, so I'll just rip out back to my lifeline, picked up the stitches for the front and put the ones on the back on hold, and then knit everything exactly to pattern flat. I'm also thinking it will benefit me in a different way, and that when I go to seam it up, it will add a lot more structure into the fabric. The Drops Tweed is 50% wool, 25% alpaca and 25% viscose. So I think the alpaca and the viscose do make for a very floppy, drapey fabric. You can definitely see the color doesn't stick up very well by itself. So I'm thinking having the seams on the sides will just give it a little bit more structure. I very sloppily whip stitched the side seam and the sleeve together, just so my sister could try it on today and get an idea of how it would fit, but I will go back and seam it up properly at the end. So it's very simple to convert this pattern to knitting flat. It's not something I've ever done before, but it was, yeah, very simple to do. I just divided the cast on stitches at the underarm evenly into the front and the back. There were an odd number of stitches to keep the pattern going in the half fisherman's rib. So I just did, for example, 2 on the front and 3 on the back, I think it was. And then I added an extra selvage stitch. This also mirrors the armhole. There's a selvage stitch here on the edge where you just knit to obviously pick up for the sleeve. So I just did a similar thing on the body, and then I will use that extra selvage fabric to seam it up at the end. So I'm hoping that because there's that extra stitch there, it will be easy to make it look neat and continue the pattern, but it's also just the side seam or the underarm seam, so it won't be very visible. I think as long as I get it neat enough and even, it won't matter too much whether or not you see like there's 2 V columns next to each other. I'll try it on as well so you can get an idea of how it is fitting, even though it's not quite done yet. We're not too far away from it though. I did think this was going to take a lot longer to knit than it has, but then I have just been working very monogamously on it. If I was knitting this for myself, I probably would have made the fur size, so it has a little bit more positive ease than what I would normally wear. But when my sister tried it on, it fit her really nicely. Obviously, I did tell her that with the yarn and the stitch, it will probably grow quite a bit, especially in the sleeves, because they're quite fitted. They have a really nice taper with these really cool decreases on them. I really like how the decreases look in the half fisherman's rib. So yes, the sleeves, I obviously want to get a little bit more width and potentially a couple of centimeters of length out of them as well, depending on how much the drop shoulder grows. So I'll just be mindful of that when I'm blocking. The body is also quite a good length already. She doesn't want it to be very long. She likes the length that it is now. So depending on how much it grows with blocking, I might have to rip out a couple of inches and then redo the ribbing. Of course, I will finish the sweater, seam it, give it to her before I make that decision, but I'm prepared to do that just to make sure she's happy with how it fits at the end. So I'm not too far from finishing now. I just need to knit the second sleeve. For the first sleeve, I just picked up the stitches as instructed, and then instead of joining in the round, I just knit back and forth. So they were already picked up from the sleeve. I don't have to seam them on. I just need to seam the underarms instead. So once the second sleeve is done, I will add in the facing on the collar. So I pick up these stitches here that are on hold and then knit the facing, and then I have a zip coming in the post. It's quite a warm sweater, to be honest. My sister's not someone who typically gets too cold, but I think because it has the open collar like this, and she does wear quarter zip sweaters a lot already, I think it's something that will fit nicely into her wardrobe. I'm quite glad that I'm enjoying knitting on this one because I do have plans to make another one for myself. When I ordered the yarn, I also bought a sweater's quantity for myself in the same yarn in this beautiful chocolate brown color. It's a color that I know I'll wear and will fit nicely into my wardrobe. My plan is to knit it the same way in terms of knitting it flat instead of in the round. And it's a really enjoyable stitch pattern. I don't know how long it will take me to knit the second one. This one has flown by. I have done most of this in only 2 weeks of knitting, I think. It is a slow going stitch, so yeah, it did take me a while to get through the body, but I think knitting it in panels seems much more manageable than knitting the front and the back at the same time. The rows are just a bit shorter, and yeah, it's almost mindless knitting for me now. By the time I had finished the front panel and was on the back panel, I did find that I could concentrate a little bit less and not be so afraid of making mistakes. So I think by the time I get onto my version, I'll be super confident in half fisherman's rib, and it will hopefully go by very quickly as well. That's all I have to say on the Lanark sweater. I think I will pick up and start doing the second sleeve next week, and then hopefully have it to her sometime in the next few weeks. I did tell her it wouldn't be done in time for her birthday, and she said that's fine because she probably wouldn't wear it anyway for the next couple of months. So there's not a strict deadline on that one, but I would like to get it finished sooner rather than later so it can be with her and not sitting with me anymore. So I have one final just about work in progress. It's not really a work in progress, but I did cast on my Mudo socks this morning. And by cast on, that's all I have done. So I've just done the cast on and knit one round. So I'll join these in the round maybe this evening if I feel like working on some socks and getting these going. So like I said, these are the Mudo socks, which is a all over colorwork sock pattern by the Petite knitter. And I'm knitting this in the recommended yarn in these two colors. This is the Biches Bûches Le Petit Lambswool in the off-white colour and the medium grey-brown colour. These colours are definitely on brand for me. I knit the Sasky socks in a somewhat similar colour palette, although it was more of a warmer brown tone rather than this cooler grey-brown. So to me they're different, and obviously the colourwork motif is very different as well. This is the recommended yarn in the pattern, and it's not a traditional sock yarn. It doesn't have any nylon or anything in it. It's just 100% lambswool, so these will definitely be more like slippers rather than socks that I wear for functionality. So I'm looking forward to probably working on these and seeing how the colourwork motif works up. I do really like the contrast cast on, and looking forward to doing some more colourwork socks. So that wraps up all of my works in progress. If you wanted to hear about one acquisition and a plan, I will quickly show that now. As you can see behind me, I have 3 skeins of this beautiful Isager Tvinni yarn in a really nice neutral cream colour. I purchased 3 skeins of this from Sunspun, which is a yarn shop over in Melbourne, and they stock a lot of Isager yarn, which I didn't know. I haven't seen this in person anywhere before. So it's nice that I'm able to try a new yarn. So my plan for these 3 skeins plus 2 extras that have yet to arrive will be to make the Daisy sweater, which is an all over colourwork sweater that was recently released by Solvara Knitwear. I fell in love with the sweater as soon as I saw it over on Instagram, and I was really looking forward to the pattern being released and making my own version. I haven't knit an all over colourwork sweater before, and in the past I've always been a bit hesitant because I don't need a really thick bulky sweater in my wardrobe for everyday wear, even in the middle of winter, and especially because all over colourwork with that extra layer of floats in the back, it's just not the most functional or practical for me. However, saying that, this is a light fingering weight yarn, so yes, I'm committing to a fingering weight all over colourwork sweater, but again, I think I'll just try and enjoy the process as much as possible and just accept that this will be a long-term project. So the yarn is 255 meters per 50 grams, so I have 3 in the main colour, which is the cream, and I have 2 skeins of pink yarn in the post coming to me now. I did order what I thought was a hot pink colour with the cream, but when it arrived it was very different to how it looked on my screen. I think Sunspun just used the standard images that Isager yarn uses, because I did see similar photos on Ravelry and on the Isager website, so I don't think it was Sunspun who was photographing the images for the website, but it was a bit of a shame when it arrived that it wasn't exactly what I wanted. It was way too purple and not a colour that I really like. So I've accumulated quite a few sweaters quantities, or have plans for sweaters in my stash at the moment. I have my other Lanark sweater, now I have this daisy sweater, and I am hopefully going to make another cognac sweater as well. So I am accumulating quite a bit of yarn in my stash, so I'm looking forward to getting started on 1 or 2 or maybe all of those projects over the winter. So that brings us to the end of today's episode. So thank you for watching until the very end. I hope you have found a little bit of inspiration for your knitting, perhaps for your summer knits if you are in the Northern Hemisphere. I'm looking forward to finally getting started on making some more winter knits and getting some wear out of the winter sweaters and socks that I have in my wardrobe. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye!